Good morning, Dan and Amy, and he's been saying it for a long time, Amy.
Yes, Dan.
Our friend Andy McCarthy has been saying this for a long time. Soylent Green is people. It is an impeachment investigation. It is not a Russian collusion counterintelligence investigation, and he's detailed it in no uncertain terms, a couple of very good pieces over the last couple of days since the Flynn plea agreement was announced, and we're pleased to have former federal prosecutor and contributing editor at National Review, where you can access all of his musings, Andy McCarthy. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, how are you?
Good. Now, I've already sung your praises, and I've so stipulated to your point that this is an impeachment investigation, obstruction of justice as the means to that impeachment potentially. But let me ask you something about the FBI, where I know because of your time as a federal prosecutor, you have a lot of good relationships and default respect for the institution, if not all the individuals, particularly in leadership. But are we at a place right now where, yes, the president is not above the law, and so the president can obstruct justice, but the FBI can also engage in a partisan parochial investigation, and there needs to be a check on both institutions?
Yeah, that's right. And, one of the things, Dan, that's I've tried to hammer over the last year, especially in the context of the obstruction of justice allegations against Trump, is that when you listen to the higher-ups in, whether it's the FBI or the Justice Department, particularly under the last administration, the Justice Department, I don't think you can say this about Attorney General Sessions, but you would think, listening to these people, that the Justice Department and the FBI constitute an independent fourth branch of government. And I think what they've done is they've gone haywire with the aspiration we have that we don't allow politics to infect our law enforcement. The fact of the matter is, it's true that we don't want politics to intrude on the four corners of any case. We don't want decisions about who to prosecute made based on whether they have an R or D after their name. But law enforcement is an executive branch function. They answer to the president. And the reason that they answer to the president in this system is very important. The president is accountable to the voters. It's the one thing that makes law enforcement accountable to the American people. And if you don't have that, you have sort of what I think we're seeing now, which is, law enforcement goes off the reservation and there's no way of reeling it in because it doesn't think it answers to anyone. And frankly, I think people in the executive branch, and very much so in this administration, have been afraid to rein them in because they're concerned they're going to be accused of, more obstructive activity, when in fact they need to rein in these law enforcement agencies. They're responsible for them.
So what you're saying, Mueller's core issue, which I've been told the whole time, did the Trump campaign collude with the Russians to meddle in the election? That was just a misdirection play?
Oh, well, Amy, I never thought, what I have always thought this was about, and I'm not saying there's not a problem with Russia. I actually, I thought there was a problem with Russia before November 8th, 2016, like for years and years before that. Yeah. So I was delighted to see people in the Democratic Party on the left suddenly realize that Russia was a problem. I don't know how long that will endure. But I never thought, I thought to the extent that they tacked on a collusion angle to the Russia meddling in the election, I thought that was a rationalization to do what they actually wanted, which was to assign a prosecutor to Donald Trump. And I'm not a big Trump guy, as you guys know, but I really think that what went on here is that a decision was made that if there was any pretext that they could sell to do it, that they needed a monitor for this administration, and that's what this has been about from the beginning.
And with respect to holding law enforcement accountable, You have this nagging problem that I thought was resolved when Paul Ryan announced it was resolved several weeks back, but the Justice and FBI continuing to defy legal subpoenas for documents pertaining to both FISA warrants and the infamous Steele dossier. What basis? On what basis do they withhold those documents legitimately?
I don't see a legitimate basis, but Dan, I'm going to say what I've been saying from the beginning, and I don't like this kind of behavior any more than anyone else does. But there's a fella living and working at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who can pick up the phone and say, I want those documents in Congress's hands or your resignation's on my desk by noon. And he's not doing that for some reason.
Well, but I mean, it would be odd, and it would just create I mean, from a PR perspective, which I'm sure that's what they're contemplating.
Well,
Christopher Wray calling Christopher Wray to resign.
Well, but these things never happen in a vacuum, right? You either have to weigh what will be the fallout of telling these guys, of the president ordering them to comply with the subpoenas, and what would be the political reaction to that, versus allowing this to go on, where you have people in the administration who are defying congressional subpoenas in what's clearly a cover-up mode. I think at a certain point, the president can't worry about what the political fallout is, because at least half, and I think more than half of the country, will be cheering a president who takes responsibility for people in the executive branch and tells them to be transparent with Congress. What's the problem with that?
Michael Flynn charged with lying to the FBI. Is he going to face any other charges, and why do you feel he needed to lie? What do you think was the reason Michael Flynn did that?
I don't think he needed to lie. I can't understand why he did what he did, particularly a guy like Flynn, who was not an unsophisticated guy, 30 years in the military, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, has a conversation with these FBI agents, doesn't have a lawyer present with him, and talks to them about telephone calls that he must know they have recordings of. I mean, I think it's a very interesting question why he did what he did, and you have to get inside his mind to understand that, and I just don't. On the other hand, Amy, the other question that ought to be asked is, why was the FBI treating him as if he were a criminal suspect? I mean, the contacts that he had with Kislyak were perfectly conventional as far as transition activity goes. And they didn't need to ask him, they didn't need him to find out what went on in the conversations with Kislyak. They had recordings of them, and they knew from those recordings that there was nothing criminal or inappropriate that happened in the conversation. So I have a hard time trying to figure what motive they had to go interview him, other than to hope that he would say something different from what was on the tape of the conversation, and that they could, have a hammer over him for making false statements to the FBI.
Mark Stein compares this to the Martha Stewart case, where she was imprisoned for lying to the FBI, but there was no underlying crime that was provable. And he suggests it shouldn't be a crime to lie to the FBI the way the FBI lies to us with impunity. What about that when there's no underlying crime, as you're describing with Flynn, and yet they get you for lying to the FBI?
Well, look, I love Mark, but if lying to the FBI wasn't a crime, a lot of people would do it, and our law enforcement wouldn't be very effective.
Right.
The problem he identifies is we shouldn't have the government lying to us, and I think the big problem we have here is that we have forgotten, as a society as well as a government, how to hold people accountable. So, if you go for years and years and you have all these people doing outrageous things and looking you in the eye and telling you black is white, and far from impeaching, firing, or disciplining them, they continue to get promoted up the chain, then you're going to get this kind of abusive executive behavior. So the problem is us. I mean, we need to hold people accountable, and we don't.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let me ask you this. Alan Dershowitz suggests that the plea agreements, even with Papadopoulos, with Flynn, lying to the FBI. That demonstrates a weakness in the case that Mueller is putting together because you don't want to get subjects for lying to the FBI. You want to get them on charges related to participation in a criminal conspiracy of some sort, and that doesn't seem to be what Mueller has been able to do to this point.
Yeah, I've been trying to make this point for weeks now. Federal prosecutors don't take small charges or pleas on minor counts in order to try to build major cases. When you get an accomplice who's involved in a major scheme, you make him plead guilty to the major scheme. It lends great credibility to your investigation, and it shakes the trees of other people who are involved in the scheme. You have somebody come into court, and you say, there was a scheme, I did it, I'm guilty, here's what I did, here's what my Confederates did. And the way federal law enforcement works, the Justice Department's policy is you're supposed to charge people with the most severe, readily provable count that you can prove in every case. And the way cooperation works is you make them plead to the big charges, and you make them earn sentencing leniency. So they have to disclose everything. They come into court and testify. And if they do all those things, then at the end, the prosecutor can file a motion with the court that allows the judge to sentence the guy below the sentencing guidelines to as little as 0 time. So that's how you entice cooperation. You don't do it by selling cases on the cheap. And if you were going to sell cases on the cheap, the last thing you would do is take pleas to counts of lying to the FBI from people that you think of as witnesses who are cooperating in your investigation. I mean, what's the one thing a jury's going to take away from your witness?
He's a liar.
To lying to the FBI.
Yeah, right.
So why would anyone? What possible sense does it make to build a case that way?
Let me just about your interactions with the FBI as a federal prosecutor, and I just wonder, as you're reading these stories about Andy McCabe that go back to the campaign, about this Peter Strzok guy and his mistress, Miss Page, and I mean, I understand they're bad apples in any organization as big as the FBI, but we're talking about people in substantial positions of authority who've had impact on the Clinton email investigation as well as the Mueller investigation. Are you surprised, disappointed? How would you describe your reaction to some of what's been unearthed?
Look, I'm terribly disappointed, but I also think that, there's an ethic in law enforcement. And, I love Jim Comey, who I've known for a million years, more years than either one of us would probably like to remember. But I think, and I'm not saying anything I haven't said a million times before, it's the ethic of law enforcement that you don't speak publicly about investigations unless and until the government's ready to put its money where its mouth is and charge someone. And I think that in the last 3 years or so, 2 years, they got away from that, and they got themselves enmeshed in the politics of the 2016 election. Now, you can say that it wasn't they who got themselves enmeshed in it, that circumstances did this. That may be so, but you still follow the rules, which means you don't talk about investigations unless you're ready to charge someone. And when they got away from that, I think the signal that it sends to the whole institution is that we're in the politics business now. And the rules are no longer the rules. And when the rules get flouted at the top, then everybody thinks that they can flout the rules. And I think what you're seeing is a steady erosion of their attachment to their traditions. And that's, if Chris Wray does anything in that institution, he needs to get that back. And if he can't, if he's not the guy to do that, then Trump should get him out now and get somebody in who can.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, contributing editor at National Review, where you can always find his very insightful writings. Andy, always enlightening. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy. Have a great day.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.